Welcome to episode number 41 of the American Regularis Podcast. I am your host, JD Walter, and it is New Year's Eve. Today is going to be a nice, short, sweet episode. This podcast is really just going to cover two things, and I think they are the two things that really just took precedent over other things in 2024 as we're looking to close out the year. Before we get into those two things, please like and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, any podcasts, right? iTunes, Spotify. Like and subscribe. Share it. Rate it. Tell your friends about it. Every bit helps. And comment. Let me know what you think. Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where I'm right. Tell me what you think were the biggest narratives or events, stories of 2024. Originally, I was going to do maybe a top 10 list, something of that nature. Look back through everything I did and just cover 10 stories. And most of the topics I cover here don't really do great spending 5 minutes on them. They're usually pretty heady, we get in depth. So I'm just covering two. And I'm not looking at them necessarily throughout their entirety of the whole year and how it happened. Just things that I think I've talked about a lot that are still as pertinent as ever. And the first one, if you've been following me for a long time, I talk a lot about Russia and Ukraine. And just a few podcasts ago, I talked about attempts at ending the war in Ukraine. Right? Trump's new guy, Keith Kellogg, came up with a plan that he wanted to pitch to the Russians about their ideas of terms for ending the war. Donald Trump said they were going to end the war on day one of his presidency. Most people don't believe it. I would be among those people, and even more so when I first heard the Keith Kellogg plan. And I lambasted it on here. I said, this isn't going to work. Well, I'm right again. Sergei Lavrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Russian government, you would have seen him recently on the Tucker Carlson podcast. He did a long interview and was very well spoken. He has recently said, look, we're not satisfied with these pitches from Keith Kellogg and the Trump administration that's coming in. And this is obvious, right? You don't have to be the foreign minister affairs. There's this very frustrating thing I've noticed as a libertarian and now more recently as a podcaster is I recognize my shortcomings and where I'm not an expert. There's a lot on that. But then you continually find news articles or videos, and it's like these headlines that are obvious and months old. COVID's one of the greatest examples of this. Everyone knew vaccinated people getting sick. For months, we all knew that. We knew masks didn't work right away. We knew kids weren't affected right away. And then like 2 years later, they come out and they're like, breaking news. And it's like, no, we all knew this. And it wasn't because we were doctors or researchers. We did a fair bit of research. But a mix between common sense and enough wherewithal to read and see through the propaganda. And when these things come out and they're supposed to be a big deal, it just frustrates me to no end. And so recently, I think maybe even yesterday, this is New Year's Eve as I'm recording. Happy New Year's, and I hope you all had a Merry Christmas. But so a day, maybe 2 days ago, this Sergei Lavrov says, hey, we're not satisfied with this deal. And he never should have to tell us this. But the way the media has created their own narrative, and the way the government has created their own narrative on the Ukraine-Russian war, many people are going to be surprised by this. A lot of these MAGA guys that think Trump was just going to cure all these problems. I mean, a cursory look at what he was offering. It was like, the Russians aren't going to accept this. So just to briefly review, they want to get a ceasefire right away, which in itself is beneficial to Ukraine because they're out of men, weapons, etc., artillery. But then they say, we want to delay membership. I think I saw somewhere up to 20 years. We'll delay NATO membership to Ukraine. Now they said if Ukraine doesn't talk, we'll stop funding them. And if Russia doesn't do anything like this, we'll fund them more. Okay, which, as I complained about, this isn't really an America First thing. When the first thing you're doing is talking about funding them even more than ever, it's like, okay, so what is it, Trump? Are you America First, or are you whatever, this neocon empire first, right? So we knew that wouldn't work. Secondly, there is no conceivable way that Russia is going to accept delayed membership. The hardest of red lines, right? Niet means niet. Written by Burns, CIA director. He wasn't at the time, but now our current CIA director, Burns, he wrote, like, they won't accept Ukraine as a NATO country. And why would they accept it now? They fought a war to prevent that from happening. They've all but won the war. It's an inevitability without escalations leading to everybody losing, which we've talked about before. So now we are offering them terms as if Ukraine's winning the war, right? It is an empty, hollow peace plan. Yeah, okay. I mean, it could offer peace, but it doesn't offer anything to the people that dictate the war. And maybe that sucks. It would be nice if you could just be bad at negotiating and get whatever it is you want, but you have no legs to stand on. One of the other things that Kellogg peace plan asked for was peacekeeping troops, which from Western countries in Ukraine. Well, one of the main reasons the Russians don't want Ukraine to become NATO is because they don't want Western troops on their border. Again, that will never happen, and it doesn't have to happen. In terms of giving up territory, perhaps, but I think Trump might try to convince Zelensky of that at some point. But even if you say, hey, we'll give you the 4 territories you've claimed, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, we'll give you those. And then NATO will become, 20 years, NATO will become, Ukraine will become a NATO country. Russia will say no to that, even if you say, hey, you can have all those territories, because they've already taken them. Now, they haven't taken the entire portions of all of them. There's still some of those regions that are controlled by the Ukrainians, but they don't have to have those given to them. They will take them eventually. They're gaining ground by the day. Like, it's speeding up. Once the summer happens and you're past the muddy seasons and the winter that slows stuff down, it'll gain more. There's no reason for them. That is one card you have, but it's just you played it too late. If the Ukrainians wanted to concede the territory for something, maybe they could get it. But the Russians can take it nonetheless, especially when you're offering them terms that involve the very reasons they went to war. Imagine that in your personal life. Imagine you were going to quit your job, right? I know this is different than war, but the example of negotiation. Imagine you're going to quit your job. And the boss is like, well, why are you going to quit? You say, well, I'm working too many hours, and I don't have the office space. I need a bigger office. And, I can make more money at this next job. And they say, well, listen here. We can get you a little more money. Just as much as this next job, right? But you're going to have to work the same amount of hours, and we can't really do anything about the office. Oh, okay, great. You just offered me what I can take for myself at another job, and the entire reason I'm quitting, lack of office space, and what was the other thing I just said? Too many hours, right? The very things I said was why I was quitting is what you're still offering me? You're unwilling to go on that? Well, no. Well, I'm not going to listen to you. That's terrible negotiating. Now, the people in charge aren't that dumb. They can't not know this. But the whole thing is this weird media propaganda narrative because they've never admitted what this is about. Lindsey Graham admitted it one time in passing. I think we put that on here too, where he's talking about how many rare and natural precious minerals and resources are in Ukraine, right? Warfare is the health of the state, right? So sometimes you say the quiet part out loud, but this is not about these negotiations aren't addressing actual Russian demands, concerns. It is the Kellogg plan only addresses the false narrative created by the government and the media, which is Putin is a crazed man with a thirst for westward conquest, and as soon as he gets through Kiev, he'll be beating down the doors in Warsaw and then the rest of Europe, even though it's, he's taken 20% of Ukraine in 3 years and had to fight, scratch and claw for every inch of it. But if he gets through Ukraine, then, which is like the most heavily aided country you can imagine, but then he'll just roll through Western Europe, right? It's insane, but that's the narrative. And the Kellogg plan might make sense if the propaganda and the lies that the government and the media tell the public, it might make more sense there. Oh, well, Putin's losing the war and whatever else. He's losing the war, the economy's about to collapse, and they use wave after wave of human soldiers, and even though they have 10 times, 5 to 10 times the amount of artillery as the Russians, or as the Ukrainians, they're losing 10 to 1 men every time they fight somewhere, which just is basically a statistic and possibility. So for all of that, if all that's true and Putin's just looking for a way out of his failed conquest of all of Europe, well, then maybe the Kellogg plan sounds pretty good to him. But none of that's true. And if I could sum up this year, and maybe all years aren't that much different. I think COVID certainly wasn't that much different in this regard. But if there's one thing I've noticed through my first year of podcasting, and thank you for everyone who's stuck with me on this, I look forward to a lot more years of it. If I've learned one thing, it's just 2024 has really shown us the government's revulsion. It finds the truth repulsive. It can't deal with it. It can't acknowledge it. And it hates it and reviles it so much that it can't even create policy or make decisions based on it. They make these policies and decisions based on narratives they create for public opinion, and then those things obviously fail to work because they're not addressing real, concrete problems. And then they create a narrative telling you how it did work. And that drives it further and further away from the truth until it's just a little spot at the other end of the road, just fading off into the horizon. The government and the media have ran away from truth in such a fundamental and profound way that it almost seems satirical. And one of these is this Ukrainian narrative. The more you read it, you just go, you guys can't be serious on this. None of this makes any sense. This Kellogg plan's a joke. The only thing I can say is, hey, they want to actually talk to the Russians. Thank you. That's good. We're starting off with a real dog shit plan, but at least they're talking. Anthony Blinken, what's his policy? Don't talk to them. They're evil. They're Hitler. Like, he's like, he's too self-righteous for our government to do his job. It's absolutely insane. So kudos to the Trump administration for saying, let's talk and let's try to figure this out. Now, they really have to realize that they have to base their plans, their actions, their negotiations, their diplomacy, their narrative in the truth. It can't be a narrative. It has to be an objective analysis of the world if they want to have any success at this. So keep talking, and you got to start finding your way back to the truth. If you try to take the reins of this government and go with the narratives that they've been playing with, there will be no success. Because what this government does, and it has for a long time, it just creates its own narratives. They tilt at windmills that they put there instead of ever, and they fight, boogeymen and monsters under the bed instead of actually addressing real world problems, which gets me into my next piece, because that's the theme for today, is the inability of media and the government to face reality. And then when they do, they expect to be heralded as journalists of integrity and modern day Cincinnati statesmen. And it's just laughable because everyone else was dealing with it the whole time. And you say, they do this breaking news like Fauci's like, well, it turns out we just kind of made up the thing about the masks and 6 feet. We all knew that. If you were paying attention, if you were reading, we all knew that was wrong. We all knew about all the policies that were failed. We knew that the death rates of COVID that they were putting out in front of us, we knew it was false. And they slowly tapered it back. And then, maybe this year, maybe next year, they'll say, they'll come out with a new paper that said this was actually wrong. And they think that they're breaking ground. And you go, no, you're not breaking ground. You're a Johnny-come-lately. And we're not going to look at you as a hero for joining what they would consider the right side of history. It was the right side of history in this case. I just hate that phrase. But earlier this month, maybe a week ago, I was very annoyed as I got on Twitter and wherever, YouTube and everywhere. Bombshell report, groundbreaking report, bombshell report. They said it over and over and over from the Wall Street Journal, with sources saying that Biden was in fact in cognitive decline during his presidency, even as early as 2021. Yeah. That's the furthest thing from a bombshell report as possible. Now, they have to call it a bombshell report because that's the wink and the nod to the rest of the media saying, okay, Biden dropped out almost a year ago. Kamala lost soundly. We've already did our mea culpas. We've already talked about all these different things of how we have to rebrand and remodel the Democratic Party. So when we call it a bombshell report, that's letting journalists and bureaucrats, politicians, be able to safely say, you still got to be within the margins, you still got to be woke, you still can't say anything too definitive, but now you can talk about Biden's cognitive decline. The Wall Street Journal came out with it, and it said it sourced people from inside Washington. Here's the thing. You don't need people in Biden's cabinet telling you this. We had it on YouTube. We had it on whatever, even the news couldn't hide it. If they give him an interview, they put him on a debate stage, they show him walking up the steps of an airplane, it was widely apparent. You don't have to have close sources for some things. If you see, you're watching a football game, guy runs a route across the middle, gets clobbered, lands funny, leg snaps in two. Everyone in the crowd, everyone watching TV, they gasp, they go, ooh, whatever. Everyone sees it. It's on the big screen in slow motion. You see the guy's leg fold over. And then a week later, bombshell report. We've had a person that was in the medical tent anonymously confirm to us that number 83's leg was broken. Well, no shit. We saw that. It was on the big screen. We heard Biden say he summed up America in a single word. And I believe if it was a word, it had to have been in like Basque or Proto-Indo-European or one of the most abstruse languages. And we watched him fall upstairs. We heard him spout nonsense. We heard him talk to dead people. We heard him go off about his leg hair. This is before the presidency. He was talking about cockroaches and letting little kids rub his leg hair in the pool. Like, these were the ramblings of a man slipping into a cognitive decline. When I was I was finishing up college during Biden's first presidential election, and I said, there's no way they're going to let him get to the election. I said this not at this election. I said it 4 years before that. I go, he can't even campaign. They're hiding him in his basement. He's senile. We said that before 2021, and then we had years of highlight reels of him wandering around on stage like he just couldn't remember why he was there, he was like buffering, trying to figure out where he put his car keys before he leaves the door. Like, where did I put those? He just wander around on stage time and time again. We saw that. The need for a bombshell report is the most superfluous, unnecessary, redundant thing I've ever seen in my life. And when you're going to try to make it news or a bombshell report to me, also breaking, Russia didn't blow up their own pipeline. Wow. Color me surprised. And I see this over and over again in my first year of podcasting. And it is amazing. It would almost be a paradigm shift if the government and the media just attacked one major news story with absolute transparency and integrity and journalistic integrity, where they searched for the truth and displayed it without bias and not trying to serve some overlord, right, from DC. That would really be a paradigm shift. But it's not going to happen. And so that is my theme for 2024. And I think 2025 could be very similar. Also, they talked about inflation. Inflation, it's much lower. The economy is much better than you think. Meanwhile, we all see it. It was as obvious as Joe Biden's decline. You can only lie to us so much. What's the old Josie Wells, outlaw Josie Wells? Don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining, right? You can't do it. You can't fool us. Not at least to that extent. You get some of them. But if you pay a moderate amount of attention, you just really see just how insane this is. And I wonder, from the Russian point of view, how they say, how the hell are we going to negotiate with these guys? They're living in a land that's as delusional as the one that Joe Biden's living in. And Joe Biden at least can't help it, right? He's insane. Senile. Like, we don't know. Like, Joe Biden might wake up some days and might not know he's president. Or he might think he's a different president. He might wake up thinking he's Woodrow Wilson. I don't know. He's senile. He has an excuse for whatever his personal narrative is, not meshing with the truth, because he can't remember the truth. The rest of the government, the media, they just refuse to accept it. So, like and subscribe. This one's going to be short. That is my general number one takeaway for the year 2024, my first year of podcasting. Looking forward to a lot more next year. Looking forward to trying to do more podcasts. Looking forward to trying to revise my content to what is most suitable for you guys. Let me know how I can improve it. If you want longer podcasts, if you want shorter podcasts, leave me some comments. Tell me what I can do to make the American Regularis Podcast a better podcast for my followers. All right. Thank you. God bless. Take care.